Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 1-year anniversary of Game Develop Repeat. It has been to the date exactly 1 year since I posted my first episode of this podcast, and it is so cool to see how many people are listening now. And I've had so much fun talking about all of these different games and digging in on them and these broader concepts and all that good stuff. And this is a fitting choice for this episode because today we're talking about Yakuza Like a Dragon, a game which I bought a year ago. A game which I bought right before I started making this podcast, and it took me a good long while to beat this game. I was playing it on and off for a year, and I finally beat it last night. What a game. There's so much I want to talk about within this game, and there's so much that I can't talk about in this game because I don't want to ruin it for anybody. The story is like all the other Yakuza games that I've played. The story is phenomenal. It is so good, so emotionally impactful. I had to just sit at the end of this game. I was just sitting there, just digesting it, and I was like, maybe I'll start doing something else. And then something in me was like, no. Sit with this. This was crazy. This was intense. This was incredible. Give it time. And I love it when a game makes you just take a second, right? Anyway, we're going to talk about this game and we're going to avoid spoilers. We're actually going to talk about how it uses the narrative as part of the gameplay. And I'm gonna do this without spoilers. If I end up having to put any spoilers, I will warn you. I'm pretty sure I figured out a way to talk about this whole narrative gameplay blend without spoiling a bunch of stuff. So without me yapping any longer, let's get to the episode. If you've been listening to this show for a while, you are probably aware of the fact that I have a deep love of turn-based JRPGs. I have a little bit of a frustration with them because they're all so long and I want to play all of them and I can't. But I love this genre. The first episode I did was about Legend of Dragoon, right? One of my favorites ever made. Love that game. I love that game. I am so impressed by it. There are just so many things that I have to say about that game that are positive. It's a beautiful experience. It is so deeply charming. I've talked about Dragon Quest, which is the most optimistic, beautiful game that I think it was Dragon Quest 11. Is that what it is? Echoes of an Elusive Age, whichever one that is. I think it's 11. That's a beautiful game. First Dragon Quest game I played. Absolutely love it. So endearing. Such an endearing game. You are also probably aware of my love of the first. You might not be aware that there's only one episode on this, but the first three episodes, the first three games in the Yakuza series, and by that I mean Yakuza 0 and then the 1 and 2 remakes. They are the most over-the-top, deranged, beautiful games. They are insane. They're so weird. Let me just talk for a second about how phenomenal the story writing is in this series. The Yakuza games take me from, oh wow, that is the most painful, heart-wrenching, soul-crushing, terrifying. It takes me from this experience of oh my god, I can't believe that's going on, and there's these gritty Yakuza members and they're just doing wild, horrible, hard stuff. They're just so hard and gritty, and you're like, oh man, this is crazy, and this guy might die and this guy might do this, and oh, this guy might get revenge on this other guy for this thing, and all this stuff is happening. And then you are laughing harder than you've laughed in the last 6 months like a minute after a scene where you thought somebody really important in the story was going to die. And you're like, how is this happening? How did I in 1 minute go from like emotional mess to this is so freaking funny? And that's just the Yakuza series. That's just what they do. And it's phenomenal. But in Yakuza 0, 1, and 2, as much as I love that, I did eventually get a little tired of the brawler combat. They mix it up, and it's nice. It's enjoyable. They mix it up in a good way. They kept me hooked for 3 games on a type of combat that I do not normally play. So that's how well they're executing on the overall experience of these games. But then I had heard that Yakuza 3's remaster has bad combat. Like, just straight up not great. It's supposed to be pretty clunky. It's like, all right, we're taking a break from that. Imagine my joy when I found out about Yakuza Like a Dragon, a turn-based JRPG in the Yakuza series, which is just like, it's a game I didn't know I wanted, and God, did I want it. Like, when I found out about it, I was like, well, as soon as that's on a good sale, I'm getting it. Like, as soon as I get a good discount on that game, I'm getting it, I'm playing it, and I got a good discount on it, and I got it, and I played it. What a game. Yakuza Like a Dragon has so many of the things that I want in a game. It has a gripping story. It has combat that is enjoyable with like great animation, entertaining choices, a job system that I like. It's just got charm and humor deeply embedded through the entire game. There's so much charm, humor, and emotional storytelling. And the emotional storytelling and the charm and all this good stuff ties in to the combat system and the gameplay just enough to where I'm constantly being reminded of like these characters' personalities a little bit, or I'm constantly being reminded of like what I'm doing, right? Who I'm fighting against, who I'm up against. There's a constant connection to the overall thing, like the overall feeling of the game for me. And I think that's one of those things where there's a lot of subtle details that go into it, and it's probably pretty hard to execute on. Like, it's all tying together really well, and tying everything together is not as easy as I think people might think it is sometimes. So let's get into some specifics. The first thing I want to talk about here is the switch in the combat from the Yakuza games that I had played previously to this game. In the Yakuza games I'd played previously, the combat is all about dodging, guarding, and attacking at the right time. It's about not getting hit. You probably see a problem if you're thinking about it. You probably see this. You probably think, wait, JRPG though, you always get hit in a JRPG. JRPGs are about getting hit. That's what they are. You're just going to get hit a lot. Yes, you can guard, fair enough, but usually that's not even a very useful mechanic in a JRPG, right? Yeah, I mean, I've recently started playing Super Mario RPG a little bit, diving into that, and its guard timing thing is great. Just by the way, the 0 damage from taking a hit is really nice. It's so rewarding, and I appreciate that a lot. I think it's a really good mechanic. But anyway, usually what you do is you go, all right, well, I'm just going to get hit a lot, and I just have more HP than you, so it's fine. They tie that in with your character. Your main character, I don't consider this a spoiler because it is a personality reveal that happens instantly. You start the game and you know this about your guy. He is a head-on kind of a dude. He's the kind of guy who just takes a punch to the face. You know, he's like that kind of guy. So when he is fighting things and he's just getting hit, you're like, yeah, that's what he would do. You know, you're like, yeah, he just takes some hits, right? Like, whatever. So rather than feeling like, oh, it's kind of weird that all my characters are just getting hit and they're not like trying to evade it, or like there's no like gameplay based on evasion and stuff. No, they just tie it in with the character's personality. Your main character, the first exposure you have to the gameplay is, hey, this character faces things head on. So when he gets hit, and that's all there is to it, right? And they really kind of make a show of that early in the game. And you know what that does? It makes you forget about it for the rest of the game. You don't even think about it in terms of the other characters. You don't think, do all my other characters have this personality trait too? No. I was just locked in. I was like, yeah, well, of course, because my main guy, that's what he does. And I'm viewing this through his eyes. So that's what's happening. Right? There's another element of this of like, oh man, how do I put this in? There's another element of the character's personality which is tied into how the enemies are presented in the game, right? It would be very, very boring if every single enemy in the game was presented as just a guy on the street that you were fighting. In a JRPG, that does not work. So the characters are all presented in different, charming, unique ways. And they got around to this through classic Yakuza series humor and something to do with the main character's like kind of personality, right? So I'll leave that there. And that is beautiful. That is such a clever way to tie everything together for this kind of shift in gameplay system. Now, we've talked about the personalities a little bit. In the combat a little bit. Let's talk about the job system. This is a game with a job system. I love a job system in a JRPG. That is the strength of a game I mentioned a minute ago, the Crystal Project. It has a cool job system. If you're into that kind of thing, peek at that game. I can't wait to play more of it and then try to cover it because it seems like it's going to be a good one. But anyway, this game, Yakuza Like a Dragon, has quite the little job system. It's got a good variety. This is one of the things that I hope they improve a little bit on the sequel, but it is very good. The only thing that got on my nerves with it was like switching jobs can be a little tedious, so you don't get to play around with it that much. I would have much rather had a system where you can switch jobs at any time outside of combat. That would have been way better for me. So that is one thing where I'm like, I wish the job switching was easier to just do on the go, on the fly. But anyway, the jobs are all tied into the real world in a charming way. So in, a fantasy JRPG, you will have your red mage, your white mage, your black mage, your thief, your whatever. You can tell I'm a Final Fantasy guy. You'll have all of these different jobs that you can just switch between and whatever. And there's like a crystal that does a thing or whatever, right? This game connects your ability to switch, not your ability to switch jobs. It connects the jobs that you can switch to the real world. Like it's like the Yakuza world. They're like, what are the kind of jobs that would exist in this environment that are relevant to your combat abilities? You know what I mean? Like brainstorm that for a minute on your own. Like what would be your black mage in the mafia, right? Just to give it a weird like American equivalent. What would be your white mage in the mafia? Who would you interact with that might be a thief? Who would be your tank? What would that look like? And then some of these characters, your characters have their own unique job that is like unique to them too, that they start as. It's cool. It's also got mini games that are tied into the world because it's a Yakuza game. That's all I'm going to say on those. Now I am going to mention, keep in mind this whole time I'm stepping around spoilers. So I might be a little vague about some weird random things, and you might be like, why didn't he go into detail on that? Well, because I'm trying to keep this experience as fresh, even mechanically, as it can possibly be. I'm really trying not to tell you about like how you first discover something or how you have to interact with it in the world or whatever. So having said that, we're going to mention summons briefly and the way that summons work. And this one, let me just put it this way, because I don't want to accidentally spoil this one because I thought it was really fun and funny. It ties into the world very well, and I like it, and it's great. It's It's tied into the world perfectly. It makes perfect sense. It's beautiful. It inspired me. It gave me a bunch of ideas for something that I'm not going to make yet, but one day maybe, right? One day I want to make a JRPG. Yeah, me and every other fledgling game developer in the world, right? It's always I want to make a JRPG or I want to make an MMO. It's like, no, give it time, you know? Oh, we'll talk about that soon too, because I had a whole JRPG idea that I'm temporarily abandoning. That'll be in the when I'm talking about my progress this past week. We'll talk about that. Let's just summarize really quickly. The thing that I love about this game is that it's taking all of these classic things from turn-based JRPGs and it's putting fresh twist on it. It's putting it in a different world and it's tying that world straight into the mechanics. It's not just throwing a skin on top. It is embedding it into the mechanics in very subtle, solid ways. And I hope that they take that a little further in the next game. I hope that they like polish it up even more and make it even more compelling in a few different ways. So I'm excited for that, but it's gonna be a long time before I find out. I also love there's a few little elements that are like huge for me that don't seem like they would be huge. A lot of the times I play a Final Fantasy game and I love it until I get to a certain point and then the story becomes unrelatable. The story in Yakuza is so human and so relatable, even in its absurdity, that it has such a strong emotional impact, right? There are some JRPGs that I finish and I go, that didn't really hit me, you know? Like, I know it's supposed to be a story about people, but it ended up feeling odd. It didn't hit right. When I finished Yakuza Like a Dragon, it hit. It was like, oh, okay. That's it. That's the story. That's the whole journey that we went on, and it's phenomenal. Dragon Quest had the same thing. When I finished it, I was like, that hit hard. That was a great narrative. Dragon Quest, 11? God, I hope I'm getting that right. Echoes of an Elusive Age. That's the one. The narrative tied up really nicely on that one too. Like, I love a good, strong close, and Yakuza pulls it off beautifully within this much more human-driven story. And I am so glad that they're continuing to explore this JRPG side of the Yakuza series, because I like that. And this is a direction that I want to see more of. As my favorite childhood series goes in a different direction and goes a little bit less turn-based, I'm so happy to have a new turn-based darling, you know? Like, I'm so excited to see where this goes, and if they keep going in this direction, I'll be psyched. And if they don't, it's fine. There's other stuff out there, but it's really exciting for me. I'm also excited to explore where Final Fantasy is going, by the way, because like they're doing some stuff that I'm interested in, and I just haven't had a chance to play yet because it takes so long for their ports to hit PC, man. Like, it takes a while, and I get it. It's fine. It'll come around. And then I got to wait for price drops, too, because that's what I do. All right, that's enough of that. Let's talk about developing games. Let's talk about what we can learn from Yakuza Like a Dragon and how we might be able to apply it to our own game development journeys. I want to explore the weight and purpose of story and of gameplay, and I want to try to communicate to you my fascination with the amount of power that a single button press holds. Because you can have a moment in a game where a player presses A and they feel horrible afterwards. You can have a moment in a game where a player presses A and they feel like they just saved the world. You can create this emotional reaction in the player over pressing a single button. That's what we're doing. That's what we do. We go, hey, do you want to press A or B right now? And the player's like, oh my God, I can't betray my friend. Then they're just moving their thumb. That is magic. That is crazy. Like, when I narrow it down to that, when I really look at what we're doing here, that's insane. I have had so many deep emotional reactions to Yakuza Like a Dragon because I was just watching a cinematic after I did a bunch of stuff. And it led to a thing, and then I watched a cinematic. And the stuff that I did was predetermined. I was going to do that stuff. I just kind of decided how. I didn't even really make narrative choices. Even with that game managed to make me feel a deep connection with those characters and make me go, oh my God, what's happening? What have I done? Right? Or like, oh, thank goodness I did that, right? It's giving me all of these deep, deep reactions from just pressing a few buttons. And then I sit back and I watch a cinematic. But I'm so closely connected to this story now because of all of the actions that I have taken. I have become this character. I have put myself, a little piece of myself, into this game and said, here, bring me around on this journey. And it all comes down to me clicking a couple buttons on a controller and watching some stuff. It's wild. And here's where I want to explore how this is constructed a little bit. You can play a game in which all of your interactions with the game are essentially press button when QuickTime event shows up, right? There are story-based games that are so deeply tied into just, it's basically a cinematic and there's a couple buttons that you press. And then there are story-based games where there's a lot more choice, right? And there are story-based games like Nier Automata or Red Dead Redemption 2 where you get to really embody the character and you're doing their day-to-day stuff. You're doing like normal, Nier Automata, I'm thinking of Red Dead right now, where you're doing day-to-day stuff. You're like skinning animals because you're hunting and you're providing food for people and all this stuff. Or Nier Automata is like such an interesting, wild game. I can't even begin to figure out how to discuss that game right now. But story-wise, that's a masterpiece, right? You've got games like that where you're you're so lost in the sauce within the game sometimes. And then you've got stuff where it's just like, oh yeah, there's a story happening on screen and I'm like kind of paying attention to it, but you're not the character. That's, I think, one of the deepest arts of game design is figuring out how to suck somebody into the game so deeply that they are the character. I think there's so many small things that go into it. And I think this is where it's really easy to underestimate like UI and gameplay mechanics. You can design a mechanic that makes the player feel like they have to rush a little bit. And suddenly there's a little more connection to the character. But if you make them rush too much, it might break and it might turn into this game's nonsense. It's too hard. Whatever. I'm not playing. Right? It can switch it can turn real easy. Right? And then there's so many other things that go into this. There's the way that the narrative is presented. There's the visuals. There's how much time are you spending watching versus playing. And there's a different balance for every player. And I don't know the answers to this at all. I just know that it's a really important factor to me. It's very powerful. This sort of abstract feeling of, am I embodying the character? And you might ask, is this the same thing as immersion? I don't know. I think this is a tie-in to the whole idea of immersion. Like, am I embodying this character? Am I really sucked into the story? But it's a specific element of it, I think. This element of how is the way that you click the button and the reason that you click the button, how is that connected to the story? How is your own interaction, like, okay, how do I put this? This is a really difficult one to get my head around, and I really want to get this point across as clearly as I possibly can, because it's important that I understand this and am able to communicate my personal understanding at this moment. So, is the player feeling rushed? Is the player feeling calm? Is the player feeling focused? What feelings are we encouraging the player to feel? Are we encouraging them to be very analytical? What behavior are we getting them to engage in, and how does that behavior tie them in to what is on the screen. If we're having a person be very analytical while the game is having a moment of panic, but the player doesn't have to panic alongside the game, it's going to break that connection a little bit, right? I think. Like if you're solving a puzzle, but there's no time limit and the building's going to explode if you don't solve the puzzle, it's kind of weird. But if there's a time limit, it's not as weird. I think most of us have had that moment in a game where the game tells you there's an emergency and you don't feel it. You go, yeah, there's not. It's fine. I can just explore everything and check for side things and whatever. It gets parodied all the time. I think that's an example of this thing. The mood of the game doesn't match what you're telling the player to do. And I think that's a really powerful tool. If you're telling the player, go do this thing right now, that's a very strong message. And if they have to do it, that creates a different feeling. But then there's also this whole aspect of like, well, if you're forcing your player's hand, then you're taking away their choice. And it's not as, there's this whole spectrum of this. And I think it's worth thinking about this specific element of game design. And that's all the specifics I can really get into here because I don't have the answers. But I think it's fascinating and I want to keep exploring it. I think the only way to keep exploring it is to keep making stuff and playing with it. And to keep playing games and seeing what impact they have on me and how they do it. Okay. I think that's a deep enough, thorough enough conversation about this whole idea. Let's real quick dig in to my game development devlog stuff. I say real quick, this might be a long one. I'm going to try to keep it short. I've been using Godot. I've been using Godot. And it has clicked with me, and I suddenly love it. There are moments where I'm still learning things that are difficult and blah, 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 but it's clicked with me, and I love it. I'm doing a huge test drive for myself right now. I finished up my previous employment on the last day of December, and I'm taking a little breather with employment for at least a month, possibly longer, to test drive just working on games, 40 hours a week minimum, right? I'm test driving it. I'm seeing how it goes and how it feels, because this idea of being an indie game dev is great, but if it's just an idea, we don't know if it's actually the dream. You got to test drive it. You got to see if you actually like the lifestyle, right? So I'm giving it the smallest, it's a major test drive. Like it's a significant test drive. It's probably going to cost me a decent amount of income. It's a significant test drive, but it is a small sample to gather data on whether or not this is a way that I like working and whether or not it functions for me. And from the first week of doing it, I loved it. I have to do a bunch of weird things. I do some really weird things to keep myself on track and motivated, but I like how the first week felt. I'm going to keep going at it for at least a month, and we'll see where we end up. So that means I did 40 hours of Godot, which is probably why I started loving it. The TileMap system made me so happy. I had so many issues with the TileMap system in Unity. I don't want to dig deep into every single one of them, but there was a bug that just never went away. There was a bug of a fundamental system that just wouldn't work. And I was like, why is this not fixed? This is infuriating. Sometimes my colliders on my tile map would just disappear for no reason, and then I would have to erase that chunk of the tile map and put it back in, and then it would work again. And there was no rhyme or reason behind it. Maybe I was doing something wrong, but it seemed like it was just some weird fundamental bug. I could be wrong. It could have been me. It was my first game. I was probably making all sorts of weird mistakes, but it was not intuitive. And there was another thing about working with Unity's tile map that really got under my skin. And it was specifically wanting to put alternative tiles while using the smart tile system. To explain this as cleanly as possible, there's a smart tile system which automatically tells the engine, oh, he wants this tile probably, right? It's like, and then you can randomize a little bit and all this stuff. I wanted to add a totally different looking tile that had a script attached to it that did something, right? with the smart tile system, if I wanted to do this, I would have to do some weird hacky thing that I didn't understand at the time, making an additional script to make it detect that tile and all this stuff, right? It seems like it's probably pretty straightforward, honestly. If I dug into it, I probably could have figured it out, but I didn't want to, so I didn't do it. And then I just changed some mechanics instead. So I didn't have the flexibility that I wanted. As I was reading about Godot's tile system, there was a little note that said, oh, by the way, if you use the terrain stuff that we have now, as of this new version of Godot, you can blah, 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 blah. And the you can blah, 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 blah was essentially you can do that thing that you really wanted to do in Unity but couldn't do because it wasn't built in and you didn't want to figure it out. It was like, hey, you can just put an alternate tile and it'll be fine. I was like, oh, if this means what I think it means, I'm in heaven right now. The animation system is also insane. I had heard good things about the Animator, so I looked into it, and one, so much easier to understand for me than Unity. I was trying to use the Animator in Unity, and I just did not understand it. It was confusing. I couldn't figure it out, and I probably should have just watched some tutorials, but I couldn't figure it out. And I looked it up, and I just got lost and confused, and I tried to read the documentation on it, and it confused me again. And then Godot, I looked at the Animator. I looked at a tiny bit of documentation, and I was immediately like, oh, okay, I get it. And then I started exploring a little bit more, read a little more documentation. I was like, oh, this is really powerful. You can do so much with this, and I immediately see what you can do. It's just, as soon as I learn about it, I look at it and I go, oh, it's obvious what you can do with this, and that's crazy. Love it. Really, really impressed by it so far. Still have a lot to learn. This is going to be an interesting week for me, doing week 2 of diving deep on Godot. Let's wrap this bad boy of an episode up with a few questions and a tip, and maybe, I wonder if I'll have a new challenge this week. I'll have to figure that out. Let's get to that. All right, questions for this week. I will answer them this time. First one, does your gameplay have any connection to your narrative or to your characters? For the game idea that I'm currently working on, yes, absolutely. The whole gameplay concept is tied into the personality of the main character and the story that he is going through. It's kind of a gimmick thing, but yes, there's absolutely a connection to the character. What is the most compelling part of your game? For the one I'm working on, I think it's a narrative thing. I don't think there's definitely a compelling aspect to the gameplay for what I'm working on now. I think the compelling aspect is it's not that I'm doing anything new. I think the tie-in to the narrative is more important than the gameplay itself. And maybe that's why I'm so excited about Yakuza Like a Dragon this week and so excited about this angle, because the game I'm now working on, drafting, I should say, is taking this angle very seriously. So yeah, I think the most compelling part of my current project is the narrative and there's kind of a gimmick behind it. Kind of a weird little hook. Story-wise. Last question. What would you like to be the most compelling part? You know what? The narrative. I want the gameplay to be very close, though. I want the story, the narrative, all that stuff to be the most compelling part. I'm interested in writing something that has a lot of narrative driving it this time, because Soot had no narrative, really. I mean, there's kind of an implied narrative, but it's not very strong. So I would like a very narrative. I would like a very compelling narrative within my game. I was going to say narrative driven, but that's not really it. That's not the right word. I'd like a very compelling narrative, and then the gameplay to be enjoyable and very well polished, and I want it to be a lot juicier. That's the other part. I want to start experimenting with juice a lot. So that'll make the gameplay compelling, but mostly I want to focus on tying everything together in a really nice story package. Yeah, those are my answers. What are yours? Here are the questions one more time. Does your gameplay have any connection to your narrative or your characters? What is the most compelling part of your game? What would you like to be the most compelling part of your game? The tip for this week, this is an interesting one. I like it. comparison. We always say, like, comparison's the thief of joy. Don't compare yourself to other people, all this stuff. I always have this thought in the back of my head that's like, yeah, but if I don't compare, how am I going to get better, right? Maybe you have this too. Comparison is not strictly necessary to learn and improve. I was thinking about this. I was like, is it actually necessary to compare myself to other people in order to learn and improve? Not really. Not in the way that we think of the word comparison. You can look at something and you can go, wow, that's really cool. And you want to go, I could do that. And then you can just try to do it. And you can compare maybe the result to a different result. Maybe. You might do that. You don't compare you to them. If you're going to do any comparison, it's just your result to their result. I would argue that you don't even need to like consciously do that. You can just make a thing after you're inspired and then go, okay, cool. I learned this, this, and this. What else do I want to learn? Like, you don't have to look at it from a comparative framework. You can look at it from a what do I want to learn perspective. I hope that makes sense. It's a little bit of a mental gymnastics thing, but I think it's a good one. I think it's useful mental gymnastics to, rather than compare yourself to successful people, look at things that you want to learn and learn them, but don't compare. Don't say, I'm worse at this than them. Just say, I would like to learn to do this, and leave it at that. Is that too wild? It seems like a weird angle, but it kind of clicked for me today. It kind of made sense for me when I wrote it down. Hopefully it makes some sense for you. And if you are just going to keep comparing yourself to others, just don't take it personally, I guess. I think that's really hard to do, though, so I like the mental gymnastics angle. Do I have a new challenge for myself? I don't think so. I think my challenge is to do another 40-hour week of game development and keep checking in with myself and see how I like it and see if it's something that I want to angle towards as a long-term career path, right? I want to keep testing the lifestyle of like having myself make things and refine that process. Yeah, I think that's the angle this week, is to just keep going with that. I think anything else is maybe excessive. That is everything that I have for you this week. I really hope you enjoyed this episode. A quick thank you for listening. It has been exactly a year. I am ecstatic to still be doing this. 54 episodes. Insane. Every week for a whole year. Phenomenal. It feels great. I'm happy with it. Thank you for sticking around. Here's to another year of this phenomenal learning experience. Feel free to reach out to me at anxiousbuddhagames@gmail.com. You can review the podcast on Spotify. I never check Apple Podcast stuff. You can review it there, wherever you listen. And my game is on Steam. If you want a free copy of my game, email me. I will give you a code, but, and this is very important, mention the podcast and that you heard about this in the podcast, because I have been getting it's not a ton of them. I'm getting scam emails and it's annoying. So I've got to be able to filter for that. If you want a free copy, just mention the podcast and be like, hey, you said I could get a free copy on the podcast, and I'll send you a copy. It's fine. It's $1 game. Have that. Right. That's everything I have for you. Thank you for listening. I will see you in the next one. Go out there, make some stuff, have a good time with it. All right. Bye-bye.